Every single day, in hospitals from New York to Tokyo, from London to Sao Paulo, doctors thread a tiny balloon into a patient's artery, navigate it through a blood clot, inflate it, and pull the clot out, saving a life, saving a limb, changing everything. It is one of the most widely used vascular procedures in the world. It's called the Fogarty catheter. And the man who invented it, the man who figured out how to do something that experienced surgeons said was impossible, that 4 major medical journals refused to publish, that companies laughed at for years. He wasn't a seasoned professor at some elite institution. He wasn't the product of a prestigious family with connections in the medical world. He was a 14-year-old kid from Cincinnati, Ohio, who had just lost his father and needed a job. That's where this story starts. And if you give me a few minutes today, I promise you, by the end, you're gonna feel something about this country and what one American teenager's brain was capable of that no school textbook ever gave you. I was digging through the history of minimally invasive surgery recently, just trying to understand where it came from. Who was the first person to say, what if we didn't have to cut a massive hole in someone to fix what was happening inside their arteries? And I kept coming back to one name that almost nobody outside the medical world seems to know: Thomas J. Fogarty. Born in Cincinnati, son of a railroad engineer who died too young, a kid who by every conventional measure had no business inventing anything. He had terrible grades. He wanted to be a professional boxer. He got into college on academic probation. And somewhere along the way, this man changed the face of surgery for the entire planet. Here's the part that makes this story feel urgent right now, in a way that hits differently than most historical stories. Thomas Fogarty passed away just a few months ago at 91 years old. He spent his entire adult life inventing, mentoring, and building institutions to help the next generation of medical innovators get their ideas to patients faster. And I'll be honest, when I came across the news, my first reaction was that I didn't know his name well enough. My second reaction, once I learned the full story, was something close to fury that I hadn't heard it decades ago. So let me tell you about the kid who walked into a hospital at 14 and came out with an idea that changed medicine forever. First, you need to understand what the world looked like before Thomas Fogarty came along. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, when a blood clot lodged itself in an artery of your arm or leg, the procedure to remove it was brutal in ways that are genuinely difficult to imagine from where we sit today. Surgeons would make a large incision in the artery, go in with forceps, and try to physically grab and extract the clot. The patient would be under general anesthesia for an extended period. Blood flow to the limb was interrupted for the entire procedure. And here is the number that should stop you cold. Roughly half of patients treated this way either died during or after the surgery, or lost the limb anyway. Think about that for a moment. You went in for a procedure specifically designed to save your leg, and there was something close to an even chance you were not leaving with it. That was considered acceptable medicine. That was the state of the art. Experienced surgeons, trained at the best institutions in the country, had simply accepted that number as a fact of life, or too often, a fact of death. Thomas Fogarty started working at Good Samaritan Hospital in Cincinnati in the late 1940s. He was 14 years old. His father had died when he was 8. His mother was raising the children largely on her own, and the family needed income. At the time, hospitals were exempt from child labor laws, which meant that a 14-year-old could work there legally. He started at 5 cents an hour, cleaning medical equipment. He wasn't a student enrolled in any special program. He wasn't a doctor in training with a clear path laid out for him. He was a kid with a mop and a pair of eyes, and a mind that had been building and inventing things since he could hold a tool. This is worth pausing on, because when people hear about prodigies, they often imagine someone who had every advantage from birth. Fogarty was not that. He was someone who had almost no advantages, who had been handed an early grief that would have knocked a lot of people off course permanently. and who responded to hardship by learning to fix things. He'd been doing it since childhood. By 12, he had invented a centrifugal clutch that was eventually picked up by a motor company and is still used in certain engines today. Not bad for a kid who hadn't finished middle school yet. So when Fogarty was promoted from cleaning instruments to scrub technician, the person who stands in the operating room and hands surgical tools to the surgeons during operations, what do you think happened? He watched. He paid attention. He asked questions nobody was asking because he was coming from outside the tradition, outside the training, outside the system of assumptions that had convinced everyone else this was simply how things had to be done. And he saw what was happening to the blood clot patients. He saw the long incisions. He saw the struggle with the forceps. He saw what happened when the procedure failed. Years later, Fogarty recalled witnessing many legs being amputated because surgeons could not effectively remove the thrombus. He watched people die on operating tables from a problem that, in his mind, begged for a different approach entirely. And somewhere in the mind of this teenager from Cincinnati, a question took root and refused to let go. There has to be a better way. This is where the mentor enters the story, because every great inventor's story has one, and this one is particularly important. Dr. Jack Cranley, one of the most respected vascular surgeons in the United States at the time, took notice of the young scrub technician who kept watching, kept asking, kept thinking. Cranley didn't dismiss him. He didn't send him back to his mop. He did something that changed the course of millions of lives. He challenged Fogarty directly. He essentially said, if you think there's a better way to do this, then go find it. That kind of mentorship, the willingness to look at someone without credentials or pedigree and say, you are smarter than you think, those were Cranley's actual words to Fogarty. That is one of the quiet forces that runs through this whole story. Cranley would later help Fogarty get through college financially when he had nothing. He would insist that Fogarty run proper animal studies before the catheter ever went anywhere near a human patient. He would connect him with a patent attorney when Fogarty couldn't afford one. The mentor and the young inventor from a fatherless household formed one of the most consequential relationships in the history of American medicine, and it started with a teenager cleaning instruments and a surgeon who bothered to look up. Fogarty carried the blood clot problem with him through high school, through college at Xavier University, where he scraped in on academic probation, through the early years of medical school at the University of Cincinnati, all while working multiple jobs and boxing on the side. He quit boxing at 17 after breaking his nose in a fight that ended in a draw, which, in retrospect, was one of the best decisions in the history of cardiovascular medicine. The idea was always there, turning over in the back of his mind. And then one day, in the way that the best ideas sometimes arrive, not through laborious calculation, but through sudden sideways perception, he watched an uninflated balloon conform to the interior curves of a soda bottle when he inflated it inside, and the entire concept clicked into place. If you could thread a deflated balloon through an artery, navigate it past the clot, inflate it until it pressed against the vessel walls, and then withdraw it, the clot would come out with it. No massive incision, no hours of interrupted blood flow, a small entry point, a balloon, and a retrieval. That was the idea. That was everything. Now there is an enormous distance between a concept and a working medical device. Fogarty was a medical student with no money, no laboratory, no industry relationships, and, critically, no institutional credibility. He went to his attic. He literally built the prototype in his attic, tinkering with a urethral catheter and a balloon. The first challenge was the balloon itself. What material would flex precisely enough inside a living artery, inflate without bursting, and deflate completely for insertion and removal? His solution was almost comically simple and completely brilliant. He cut the fingertip off a size 5 surgical latex glove and tried to bond it to the end of a hollow tube. The problem was that no adhesive existed yet that could reliably bond latex to catheter material. But Fogarty had grown up fly fishing. Precise hand tying, the kind of knot work that goes into building lures and flies, was something he had done since childhood. So he tied the latex tip to the catheter with fishing line. That is the origin story of a device that is now a global standard in vascular surgery: a latex glove tip, a hollow tube, fishing line, and the mind of a kid who had watched too many people lose their legs in an operating room and decided that was unacceptable. The device worked. He tested it on glass tubes filled with gelatin that simulated clots within arteries. At Cranley's insistence, he moved to animal studies and cadaver testing. Proper scientific validation, not a shortcut. He accumulated evidence. He built the case. And then he tried to tell the world. This is the part of the story that should make you genuinely angry. Fogarty submitted his paper, the first formal description of the balloon embolectomy catheter and its results, to the major surgical journals of the day: Surgery, Archives of Surgery, the Journal of the American Medical Association, Annals of Surgery, 4 of the most respected publications in American medicine, and all 4 rejected it. The prevailing sentiment in surgical circles of the time, as Fogarty himself recounted it, was essentially this: the bigger the incision, the bigger the surgeon. Minimally invasive surgery wasn't just unfashionable, it was treated as evidence that you weren't a serious practitioner. Here was this young surgeon with no established name coming in and suggesting that the entire establishment had been accepting unnecessary amputations and deaths for years. Of course they pushed back. Of course they didn't want to hear it. The manufacturers weren't interested either. From the late 1950s into the early 1960s, Fogarty spent years trying to find a company willing to produce the catheter. Company after company turned him down. He recalled that they thought he was, in his words, some stooge fooling around. The people with the manufacturing infrastructure and the business capital to actually bring this device to hospitals looked at a young, unproven surgeon with a device made of fishing line and a latex glove and saw nothing worth their time. It took the personal intervention of a prominent cardiothoracic surgeon at the University of Oregon, where Fogarty was completing his surgical residency, who connected him with an engineer named Lowell Edwards, a man with his own company and the technical capacity to actually manufacture the device at scale. And once it was manufactured and surgeons began using it in real operating rooms on real patients, the resistance crumbled in real time. Because it worked. Not incrementally, not partially. The outcomes were transformative. The paper that 4 journals had rejected was eventually published not on the cover of a prestigious journal, not as a featured article, but in a small section at the back of a journal called Surgery, Gynecology, and Obstetrics, in a column literally titled "Surgeon at Work." It wasn't glamorous, but it was out. And once other surgeons tried the device and started talking to each other, the Fogarty catheter began its quiet, unstoppable revolution through vascular surgery. It spread. It was adapted. It was modified for new applications. Other surgeons began to realize that the core principle, insert something small, navigate to the problem, and come back out, could be applied in ways Fogarty hadn't even originally imagined. The first balloon angioplasty procedure, the technique now used hundreds of thousands of times each year to open narrowed coronary arteries without open-heart surgery, grew directly out of the Fogarty catheter as its conceptual foundation. Think about that lineage. The device assembled with fishing line in a Cincinnati attic became the ancestor of one of the most common cardiac interventions in modern medicine. By the end of his career, Thomas Fogarty held well over 200 medical device patents. He invented the stent graft, which transformed the treatment of abdominal aortic aneurysms, a condition that had been a near-certain death sentence, into a procedure surgeons could approach far less invasively. He co-invented the Hancock tissue heart valve, the world's first tissue-based heart valve.
He founded or helped found multiple medical device companies. He received the Presidential National Medal of Technology and Innovation, which is this country's highest honor for technological achievement. He was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame alongside Edison, the Wright brothers, and fewer than 100 other inductees in history at the time he was honored. According to the National Medals Foundation, his catheter is used in approximately 300,000 procedures annually, and over the course of his device's history, it is estimated to have saved the lives and limbs of more than 20 million patients worldwide. And he started it all as a 14-year-old cleaning instruments for 5 cents an hour. Here is what gets me every time I think about the full arc of this story. At almost every juncture, the system was structured to stop Thomas Fogarty from succeeding. He grew up without his father.
He had no money, no academic record to be proud of, no family connections in medicine. The journals said no. The companies said no. The established surgeons who had trained their whole lives in the older method looked at him and heard arrogance where there was actually observation. He was a kid from the outside in every possible sense, and yet, he is the reason that today, somewhere in a hospital in this country and in dozens of countries around the world, someone's limb is still attached to their body. Someone's mother walked out of a vascular ward. Someone's father made it to his grandchildren's birthdays. The chain of cause and effect runs straight back to a 14-year-old with a mop who was allowed into a hospital that gave him a chance to see and think and question. This is the kind of American story that doesn't always make it into the textbooks, and I think that's a serious loss, not because we need to add another name to a list somewhere, but because the lesson inside it is one we actually need. It's not a lesson about genius. Fogarty was the first to say he wasn't the best student in any room. It's a lesson about what happens when someone who the system has written off is given a single opening, a 5 cents an hour job, a mentor who believes in them, access to a problem nobody else is bothering to solve, and what that person can do with it. The Fogarty catheter exists because one surgeon looked at a scrub technician with bad grades and said, "You are smarter than you think." And because that kid believed it just enough to go home and start tying balloon tips with fishing line. We are living, all of us, in a world shaped by that moment, and most of us never knew his name. Thomas Fogarty passed away in December 2025. He was 91 years old. He had spent more than 5 decades inventing, building, and mentoring the next generation of medical innovators. He founded a non-profit institution dedicated entirely to helping new medical device ideas get to patients faster because he never forgot what it felt like to have something real and have nobody believe you. He spent the last chapter of his life making sure the next Fogarty wouldn't have to wait as long. The world lost him quietly, and most people still don't know what it lost. So here's the question I want to leave you with today, because I think it matters beyond history class. Is there someone in your life right now, maybe a kid, maybe someone without the right resume, who is seeing something that other people aren't, who is asking the question that everyone else has stopped asking? Because if Thomas Fogarty's story tells us anything, it's that the next invention that saves millions of lives might be sitting in someone's attic right now, tied together with fishing line, waiting for one person to say, "I see what you're doing and I believe you." If this story moved you, share it. Because Thomas Fogarty spent his career making sure other people's ideas got a hearing. The least we can do is give his story one. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want more American history that never made it into your textbooks. I'll see you in the next one.